There's a huge need in the packaging industry for applying the same principles that the medical industry applies, which is key opinion leadership. So, in the same way
Mm,
as there's a very small number of people worldwide who conduct all the drug trials because they are the
mm.
experts in whatever that field
Right.
is.
Hi, everyone. I'm David Marinac with ABC and the Repackaging Revolution and Specialized Packaging Alliance. Our guest today is Matthew Rogerson from the Pack Scout. Matthew, thanks for joining us. Can't wait to learn more about what you do.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit more. I mean, it's a very broad stroke, of course, in the packaging space. A lot of people and I know you and I have talked at length before, but there's so much more to packaging than just brown boxes and bubble wrap. Fill us in a little bit on your background, how you got into obviously taking us up to the Pack Scout. Give us that 30,000 foot view, if you will, of what it is that you do and have done and do now.
I guess the simplest way of describing it would be standing on the shoulders of others. And it's been a industry that I kind of fell into, but I have been able to learn from others' experience as I go along. So the last 20 years, the short version is I started off with live events that were meet the buyers, where the people who purchase packaging for brand owners met with their supply chain to understand and grapple with whatever their packaging needs were.
You called that like a speed
That was a
dating
kind of
type
a
of thing, right?
combination. Yeah, exactly. And that was a sort of a combination of delegate acquisition, operations, conference programming, marketing, sales, all of that was sort of thrown into it. I used the information I gained from the conversations with the brands over that kind of 7 or 8 year period to move into editorial. I ran the global trade magazines in packaging and converting for Global Data. They were, at the time, the only global packaging magazines that existed. I think
Really?
there's a few more now, but historically the issue's been that they've been quite regional. So even things like Packaging World tends to be American focused, or Packaging Europe, of course, is packaging European focused. There were very
Sure.
few that were sort of saying, well, packaging's a global phenomenon and is everywhere. So we need to be
Right.
everywhere talking about it. And they hired me to do that job because I had a very deep packaging market knowledge. And they felt it was better to get somebody who understood the market writing about it than
Right.
somebody who was good at writing to try and understand the markets to write about it.
Right. Right.
And then moved into a company called Jindal Films, where we were making BOPE and BOPP film. And I managed the marketing and communications, innovation and sustainability strategy for Americas. And then Pack Scout, as of last March, when I set up on my own.
So you stepped out, you hung the awning, as they say, and put this Pack Scout on the map, if you will. And so with the Pack Scout, so take it, I mean, obviously there was a good background of what it is that got you here. So what does the Pack Scout do? And take us a little bit more into the Pack Scout.
I've been thinking about that recently, how to kind of elevator pitch, condense what I do. The simplest would be act as a trusted advisor to the retail brands and converters and help them to close the gap between consumer need and what that means for their manufacturing operations. So how do I package against a specific consumer need? Because a lot of the time, that's where the struggle or the problem arises.
Disconnect.
Is
Sure.
consumers say they want it to be sustainable or novel, and you're trying to hit a moving target of what they want, while at the same time you are trying to make it in with limited resources, with limited finances, with all the restraints that you've got on it. So the simplest version is be a trusted advisor to help people optimize their packaging, whichever level of the supply chain they're at.
Well, it's an interesting, so here's my question with that, because I think it ties in very well to what and I totally, being in the packaging space, I totally get what you're saying, that disconnect. And often, I know you'll agree with this, there are times, even at the existing company, that there's a disconnect. You got one person in one department saying we need to be more sustainable, another person saying, hey, we got to cut costs, another one saying we can't get this stuff in or whatever. But what I'm asking is, who are you talking to, or at least attempting to talk to, if you will, when you do pitch or talk to that company, whoever that may be? What is that, a particular like a title, or are you going after a sustainability manager? Give us an idea of who you're looking to really chat with?
Executives responsible for operations and commercial, so sales, marketing, operations, production, tend to be the people that I'm working with most closely. The reason for that is that I kind of straddle both worlds. So I find it relatively easy to be able to communicate between engineering and sales. And so
Right.
there's this whole, that was all based on, 15, 20 years ago, you had the whole Dilbert principle when, he's
Yep.
talking about the complete gaps that exist between the engineering teams and the kind of sales and marketing teams internally in companies. And so helping them within their own company to be able to get on the same page so that they can present a united front. I tend to find that what I do usually sits between two different teams. So I'm trying to help the engineering team create the right or use the right technology or find the right technology, but then that's going to have to sit within a certain budget or cost center in order for the procurement team to be able to buy it. So both tend to be the ones that I work with. Normally it's been executives who have a responsibility for recommending, specifying and authorizing packaging. That's the kind of the three main areas that I'm involved with. So if they have anything to do with what it looks like, what it's made from, or buying it, those would be the people that I would tend to be working with most closely.
So let me ask you a follow-up to that. Are you finding that, because it's such an interesting time in our industry, are you finding that it's a difficult, sustainability and those buzzwords like that are very hot buttons. Are you finding that companies are receptive to what you do? And then the $64,000 question, I guess you could say, are they actually willing to change and do something? I'm just fascinated. There's no right or wrong answer. I'm just very curious.
It is a very good question. And I think that there's a huge gap that exists in the packaging industry between intention and action. And that applies to all the companies that work within it, and it applies to the consumers that are buying the product at the other end. A lot of the time there's a intention. We want to be doing the right thing, partly because we have to. Regulations demanding that we comply with it. Legally, we have to make it in a certain way. From a marketing perspective, a lot of the consumers are saying that they're interested in sustainability or innovation or better products. But the challenge is that a lot of the companies still find it very hard to get their feet on the ground. They're basically treading water, and there's no kind of solid ground to stand on to start from. So while they're treading water, they're trying to tread water and climb up a hill, which is obviously not very possible.
It's difficult.
What I find is that if they're willing to accept that there may be another way, then it is a lot more likely that they will be able to adapt and turn the oil tanker. If they are ticking boxes, so sustainability is something that we do because our shareholders demand it or everybody else is doing it, then they're more entrenched. Trying to get somebody to change, like what it all boils down to, and we've had this conversation before, but in anything, whether it's a sale or understanding like an education or making a change, the key thing that has to happen is what they call transfer of ownership. So understanding how I'm going to use this thing. So if I can understand and see myself using sustainability or a change or innovation in my day-to-day activities, then it's easier to buy the solution that's going to help me do that. If I can't see myself using it, I'm never going to buy it. I'm never going to use it. I'm never going to change. And that's the thing that I think causes the most paralysis at the moment, is that a lot of people...
frustration, if you will, as well. Sure.
Yeah, they know they need to make the change, but a lot of them don't feel the need to make the change. So they can't see themselves doing it. If they can't see themselves doing it, they're never going to do it. Like no matter how many features or benefits or price or whatever you talk to them about it, they're not going to move because they can't see themselves making that move. So that's the kind of fundamental issue that I face, especially in sustainability, because it's such a confusing topic that even if they want to make the change, a lot of companies don't even know where to begin. Do I need to make a change? Or where do I make a change? Or what direction do I make a change into? And those are the types of things that when we do work together, we can kind of help simplify that process, because it's a case of saying, well, what does sustainability mean to you? And what are you trying to communicate to the market? Because that communication part is what you need to work on. Whether you're taking material out of your packaging or making it more recyclable or it's compostable or whatever it does, you need to communicate that to consumers so they can understand it and why it's a sustainable benefit to them. And then you'll be able to transfer that ownership, because at the moment, telling consumers that you've taken material out of your packaging and still charging them the same amount of money is not sustainability. It just comes to them as a kind of a greenwashing claim, because they're like, well, I see you've saved money, but I haven't. So this doesn't mean anything to me. It's not sustainable for me. And that's the loop that I see playing out a lot of the time, is that companies have the right intention, but the implementation falls short because they don't communicate the benefit to the consumer, the person who's actually going to be using that product. Like, why is it sustainable for them and not why is it sustainable for us as the brand or the supplier?
And you mentioned a couple of things which I think is so spot on. We don't have a clear-cut manual to rely on. The rules for what some people refer to as sustainable, biodegradable, compostable, eco-friendly, whatever, is a big stew out there of spinning plates. And then a lot of people that are afraid to communicate. So for example, I think you and I have talked about people make a decision about something that they feel is the best track to go, but yet they're afraid to communicate that in case it's the wrong track to go. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And at that point, because it doesn't do anybody any good if they're not communicating why they're doing something, and that transfer of ownership, as you say so well. And there seems to be a lot of misinformation, fear, confusion, and then you get that proverbial try to swim or try to climb uphill in water, and you can't do it. It's got to be crazy frustrating.
Yeah. The area that I've seen over the last probably 15 years or so develop is that, first of all, the single person responsible for all aspects of packaging has disappeared from the brand.
Yes.
So you don't have just one person who does everything. And so because it's now split between different people, you're going to have different perspectives or needs or interests that are all funneling into that one thing, which used to be one person. Now it's 3 or 4 or 5 or 6. On top of that, there's fear that's been embedded into the industry of getting something wrong, which a lot of that is down to the kind of hyperconnectivity of the kind of the digital age that we're in, where before, if you made a mistake, then it would be localized because it might get into the local papers, or it might be like somebody might tell a friend. But now it goes globally, it goes viral in an instant. And then you've got the problem where brands are now able to individually communicate to consumers. So we've gone from that mass marketing approach to that individual personalized approach. And all of the data for things like the kind of online presence says that when I make a positive comment about my brand, I buy a shirt and I like my shirt, so I sort of put online, I bought this great t-shirt, it's wonderful and it's so soft and whatever. I'm expecting that brand to acknowledge my positive comment normally within about 3 to 4 hours. And if they don't, I'll be like, they don't care about their customers. They haven't got in touch with me. And if you think about that for a moment, like the trillions of interactions that they're having to keep on top of, you can't do anything new or bold in that kind of mindset. It's very, very hard to innovate or thrive or adapt, because you're spending all of your time trying to kind of monitor every single individual communication with consumers. And all of that means that you end up in this position where there's just so much pressure to get it right first time, and people are expecting the projects to all be successful, and there's no delays, and everything's so lean these days that there's no input. If a trial fails, these days it's catastrophic because there's been no allowance.
And
for the
people
fact
lose their jobs and people panic, and there's a whole fear factor to that too. So with that in mind, because I want to make sure before our time is done, because I think it's really important, it's got to be, what I want to try to be able to do is, and I know there's that, and we both agree that it's such a moving target and there's different people at different companies. It's not that single person that's in charge of making these decisions. So how do we, Pack Scout and Matthew, penetrate an account? Is that through, and this is not meant to be a loaded question, but what I'm saying is that something that needs to reach out to a sustainability person? And by the way, are you noticing too that a certain size company fits in your wheelhouse better than others? Does that make sense? Meaning the big colossal giants, I don't know whether that's a target for you, where the craft foods are so big that you could get lost in that. Or is it something that it's more of a company that wants to someday be a craft foods that's a little bit under the radar, like a Marzetti's here in Ohio that wants to? Is there a certain size company that actually you find, Matthew, willing to do something and actually versus talk about it? Just figured it's a broad question. I apologize.
No, I don't understand what you mean. I think that from a resource perspective, what I can do is I can drop in experience in marketing and innovation and sustainability. So normally the kind of mid-size up to 2, 3, 400 million, they're not going to have necessarily that resource within the company. So it's an easy thing to just drop in and be like, hey, if you want to shortcut your way to what the big people are doing and understand what's going on in the mindset of the Coke or Pepsi or Nestle or whoever their packaging department
that big 900-pound gorilla. Sure.
Exactly. And if you want to understand what they're dealing with and how they're operating and what you need to do to get into being of maximum support to them, then I can easily do that, because that's what I do day in, day out. There's the conversations I'm having with those people. The really big companies, they tend to have at least the resource internally. So the difficulty with those companies is that it ends up being this common sense discussion, which unfortunately in the packaging industry is still lacking, where there's this kind of, the conversation I've had frequently is we already have people in our company who are being paid to do that, to guide and explain and provide that experience. And rather than a willingness to believe that there could be another perspective, they tend to kind of say, like, we've got these people, so we're going to stick with those
we're
people.
handled.
And I think that's the challenge, is the fact that people don't know what they don't know, and trying to tell them, trying to download in a conversation.
Well, and tell them in a way that isn't going to make you the enemy. You're trying to basically, I hear what you're saying. I mean, if I hear you correctly, you're saying, look, you have people here, great, but they're not doing anything. You haven't changed their packaging. And I don't want to speak for you, but I see that in my world. They say a great game and we need to do this and this and this, but am I hearing you correctly? You're basically saying a lot of those companies, yeah, we got somebody. Yeah, we're good. No, you're not good. Is that a fair way to put that?
It is. The number of times where, even recently, there's a global leading confectionery brand, basically the one that you're thinking of. If you thought of three names, one of them's right.
You're probably right. Exactly.
They have still not changed on the label. They talk about the mass balance approach to how they're improving their sustainability, and they have still got the wrong association listed on it. And this has been repeatedly flagged by somebody that I know very well, who's himself a leading packaging technologist, an extremely experienced person, and he hasn't escalated it beyond just sending it to their kind of packaging team and printing team saying, hey, you might want to fix this. But that's something that is been 3 months, 4 months without being resolved. This is a $60-70 billion plus company. Even the biggest ones have got these issues. Even the the major retailers are misstepping all the time.
100%.
It's just that they have the resources to swallow a couple of mistakes or learn from them and then do better the next time. And they also don't tend to publish them. Whereas unless you're kind of engaged with it, you don't necessarily notice them. All that's to say that size doesn't necessarily ensure that you're going to be better. A lot of the time, the bigger the company, the more restricted they are in their ability to move, because it has to hit a certain scale, or it has to kind of fulfill certain risk requirements. And that makes it very difficult. You can't pivot. Again, the best example is this whole thing which came out during digital print, when they used to describe the difference between a speedboat and an oil tanker. One turns incredibly slowly, and that's because you've got to make all these changes and it can't pivot. for years, that was a huge issue because you've got
Sure.
major, like a great example was a decade ago or so, having this conversation with a major cosmetics brand. And they said the problem is that the trends are every 6 months and our manufacturing is 2 years. We're basically having to take a kind of a 4 out of 1 long
Right.
shot flyer every time.
Yeah.
This is the trend, because it might not be. It might just be a fad.
Yeah, right.
Or it might
Right.
be like the next big thing. They can't do it quickly enough to hit all of them. So they have to figure out what they're going to do and what has the most likelihood of success. That's the problem with the big companies. The smaller ones, because they tend to be closer to the pulse, more willing to risk because they're smaller. They don't have they don't have as far to fall if it
Yeah, right.
goes wrong.
Exactly.
They also tend to be newer because like they're more recent companies. So because they're more recent companies, they tend to be created more closely to the current market because the conditions that they came into the market in were 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 20 years ago, not 140 years ago, like the larger brands.
Like some. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me land this plane if I can. And again, you and I could talk forever because there's so much in common with what I see where you're at and the frustration level, because companies need to change. They say they want to change. Their customers say they want to change. And yet here we are. So let me ask you a question just to land this plane. And I'll make sure at the end of the video too that everybody has your contact information, how to reach out to you. But how do they work with you? Is this something, Matthew, that when you're connected to a client, is this something that you're on board for a 90-day stretch? Is this something that you do once and then circle back? What does it look like when they're working with a Pack Scout? What does that entail?
There's a couple of different ways. Probably the easiest is from a technical consultancy perspective. So here's our problem. We want to reach these people in the market to understand what their needs are, and we want to communicate to them how our solution lands against them. That's pretty easy to do, whether it's a webinar or a survey or a technical report, but basically creating thought leadership that positions that particular company with the right solution and mentality to service a particular market. That's one of the main areas that I work in. The second one is in terms of drawing from a very wide experience and communicating that experience to help people shortcut their route to commercial success in packaging. So by that, rather than them having to run hundreds of different projects, I work with brand owners and retailers to understand their experience on certain topics, whether it's regulatory or innovation or marketing and sales or packaging sustainability. And then by getting what 300 or 400 or 500 of them think at an executive or kind of senior director level about packaging, what it does is it helps to signpost for the smaller companies or people facing that same issue. It helps them to understand this is what the others have done first, so I can follow in their footsteps.
Brilliant.
And I can also avoid that cliff over there because somebody's done it before me. So that tends to be in the form of market research reports, webinars, or educational platforms to help guide people. The other area is in terms of targeted messaging. And the final area, which has been probably the most interesting and the one that I see being the biggest part of my business as I move forward, there's a huge need in the packaging industry for applying the same principles that the medical industry applies, which is key opinion leadership. So in the same way as there's a very small number of people worldwide who conduct all the drug trials because they are the experts in whatever that field is. They make or break each of those drugs. A drug makes it into the market because those doctors say it's going to work. And if they say it's not going to work, it will not come into the market.
Well, and they get investor dollars from that. I totally see that connection. I think it's brilliant.
Exactly. And so in the same way in the packaging industry, the major buyer for Unilever or Coke or Pepsi decides to stop buying plastic, for example, the seismic impact of that decision is enormous. So what I've been working on is getting the market makers to be surveyed and act as a community to educate each other on what they've learned and key
Right.
education. And that is going to be more of it's free for the people who are the packaging heads, because they need to have an operation, or need to have an option that gives them the chance to what we call cross-fertilize innovation and ideas and sustainability. And basically that's saying a lot of the time a solution to a food packaging problem can be found in cosmetics or tobacco or beverage. But because that food person doesn't have any experience of what the toothpaste people are up to, there's no reason for them to have access to that innovation. So what I'm working on at the moment is forming a way that you can cross-fertilize those ideas so that it's not a competitive conversation, because they don't compete with each other. So solving that problem doesn't cause a disconnect in the market, but it will help people to find a lot more quick solutions to help them move their innovation and commercialization forward, reduce their costs because somebody's done it before. And then it also gives them somebody who can talk to them about the problems or the products or the development and the packaging and say, oh yeah, when we did this, this is what happened, or this is the problems that we faced. And that is the kind of end game for the packaging scout, is how do I find a way to help the packaging industry at an executive level share experience to help them make fewer missteps and kind of hit their packaging goals faster?
Wow. You nailed it, friend. I'm grateful for the time. And again, I want to make sure that if nothing else, everybody will have the access and ability to contact you. And I know you're onto something. I totally love that tied it together, as you said at the end. If you can do this from a non-competitive standpoint and allow people to digest your research, your information, and they can make thorough decisions versus the my way is better than your way and the cattiness that we have going on, I think it's absolutely brilliant. So thank you, my friend, and thank you for joining us. I really appreciate the time.
You're very welcome. I mean, the simplest way of looking at it, I'd say, for the packaging scout is a sorting house for everything packaging related. So because I'm sitting in the middle of all these conversations, then it's easy for me to be able to say to somebody, whatever their topic of conversation is, this is how you can solve that problem. And that's what I did in the editorial side, and that's what I find is the area which is easiest to do today, is be like a kind of a concierge for packaging needs.
100%. And people need that too. And people want somebody that says, this is what I know. This is what's needed. This is what's, and if there's anything that's missing right now, is that. I can't wait to see what you guys do at the Pack Scout. Thank you again, Matthew, for joining us.
Thank you, David. Have a wonderful day.
Yeah, man. You too.
Thanks.
I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you want to see more, here's another video that you can check out, and I hope you enjoy it. Thanks.